No, I don't want you to do that, but I will. Tedros is really an outstanding person. I've known him from the time that he was the Minister of Health of Ethiopia. I mean, obviously, over the years, anyone who says that the WHO has not had problems has not been watching the WHO. But I think under his leadership, they've done very well. He has been all over this. I was on the phone with him a few hours ago leading a WHO call.
Praising China's transparency, sir?
No, I'm not talking about China. You asked me about Tedros.
World Health Organization praising China for its transparency and leadership on their response to the pandemic?
You know, I can't comment on that because, I mean, I don't have any viewpoint into it. I mean, I don't even know what your question is.
Thanks, Deb.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And thank you all for listening to us talk to the American people. We've been watching the testing results. It's very critical to us. It's very critical to be looking at that very carefully. Let me tell you two things that are going on in parallel. Our system to look at flu-like illnesses is still up and running in county after county and state after state. And why is that important? For those who've been following the flu epidemic this year, you'll remember we had flu A, then we had another peak of flu B, and those systems that are in every single state and local government is the platform where we can see whether there's any increase in flu-like illnesses. So if you have very few cases in your state and in your counties, maintain your flu surveillance system that you work closely with the CDC on, and look for changes in your slope of new flu-like illnesses. And there are enough test kits, and there's particularly enough of the CDC test kit where we started that runs on your flu surveillance platform to be constantly surveilling what those flu-like illnesses are in our states and counties that have very low number of cases. We have counties still with 0 to 1 cases, but they can participate in the surveillance that we need to have out there now by using their flu-like surveillance system, and we thank all of the states who have that up and running. If you go to cdc.gov and go to flu surveillance, you can see state by state, and you can be looking at those curves with us. It's what we're looking at day by day, in addition to the testing results that are coming in. For the testing results, still, there's 4 counties that constitute the majority of both the current cases and new cases. I think you know those are New York City, Westchester, New York, Suffolk, and Nassau County. Those are the 4 counties, all associated with New York and the New York metro area. There's a few counties in New Jersey, but this is still where 56% of the cases are and 56% of the new cases. It's very important that people look at the number of new cases per day. Remember, we told you it was going to take us a while to work through the testing backlog. I think we're close to working through the testing backlog so that you can interpret the number of cases per day, and you will see in New York City that the number of cases per day has been relatively constant over the last 3 days. Those are the number of new cases per day. This is a real call to every person in New York City and the New York metro area to continue every one of these 15 days to slow the spread and to do that part of it at the same time that they're following the mayor's and governor's piece. Yesterday, we talked about people that may have left the metro area that were residents of the metro area that may have gone to secondary homes or other places to reside. And we've asked all of them to carefully monitor their temperatures and self-isolate from the communities where they went, just to ensure their own health and the health of their communities while people move around the country. Finally, why this is so important. It's very important to me personally because my grandmother, for 88 years, lived with the fact that she was the one at age 11 who brought home flu to her mother, named Leah, for which I am named, when her mother had just delivered. And her mother succumbed to the great 1918 flu. She never forgot that she was the child that was in school that innocently brought that flu home. This is why we keep saying to every American, you have a role to protect each and every person that you interact with. We have a role to protect one another. It's why we are social distancing and you are social distancing. But to every American out there, when you are protecting yourself, you're protecting others. And if you inadvertently, I know, brought this virus home to someone with a pre-existing condition, I can tell you my grandmother lived with that for 88 years. So this is what we're trying, this is the message that's important to everybody. This is not a theoretic, this is a reality. You can see the number of deaths that are occurring. We all have a role in preventing them. So thank you for the work that you do to get our message out to others, to really ensure that every American understands how important their role is as we move through these next 5 days, to not let up for an instant. I hear some reports that someone said, oh, well, the new cases in New York are increasing, or the hospitalizations are increasing. The number of new cases over the last 3 days have been consistent, but not rising any more than a consistent day-over-day rise. You will see hospital cases continue to increase because they are a reflection of what happened 1 to 2 weeks ago before the full mitigation efforts were put into place. So each person in every place, no matter what county, what community, what state, can work with us to ensure that we prevent the spread of this virus to others. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I just want to spend a couple of minutes telling you a little bit about some information that I got on our weekly call that we have at least once a week with the WHO, which is led by Dr. Tedros and Mike Ryan, who's the point man there, to give us some information. And in that regard, I want to apologize for my curt response to you when you asked me about the China deal, because I shouldn't have done that. That's not my style. But what I really wanted to say is that my job is that I'm a scientist, I'm a physician, and I'm a public health person, and I don't like to get involved in that stuff. So anyway, getting back to the WHO. So we learned some really interesting information, because obviously the other countries like China and others had been hit prior that we did. One of the things that was striking to me, and I just throw it out because it's something that we will face. We're not facing it now, but we will face. Our Chinese colleagues are very concerned because they went through the entire cycle of the curve to come down. They have very, very few cases. But what they're starting to see as they're relaxing the constraints on travel, that they're getting imported cases. And they wanted to warn us that when we get successful, make sure you very carefully examine how you're going to release the constraints on inputs. So I know we're going to be successful in putting this under control, but I think we're going to have to remember we don't want to import cases in. That's the first thing for today. The second thing that was important is that it was something that Dr. Birx mentioned, and that is when you look at the inflection of the curves, we now have multiple different countries that have gone through various phases of their individual outbreaks. And you could learn something from them about where you are in your own outbreak. For example, when China went up, what happened is they just didn't turn around. They went from going to, I'll just take an arbitrary number, 500 new cases a day. The next day it was 1,000 cases, then 1,500, and then 2,000. But once the number of new cases each day starts to flatten out, that's when you get to that point where the inflection goes down. So what things we want to look for, the things that Dr. Birx had mentioned. That doesn't mean you declare victory when it does that, but you know you're at least on the way to where you want to go. And I think that's really very important. The third and final thing that I think gets back to the question that many of you in the audience have asked of us is about, would this possibly become a seasonal cyclic thing? And I've always indicated to you that I think it very well might. And the reason I say that is that what we're starting to see now in the Southern Hemisphere, in Southern Africa, and in the Southern Hemisphere countries is that we're having cases that are appearing as they go into their winter season. And if, in fact, they have a substantial outbreak, it will be inevitable that we need to be prepared that we'll get a cycle around the second time. What does that mean for us in what we're doing? It totally emphasizes the need to do what we're doing in developing a vaccine, testing it quickly, and trying to get it ready so that we'll have a vaccine available for that next cycle. In addition, to do the randomized controlled trials of drugs so that we will have a menu of drugs that we have shown to be effective and shown to be safe. because I know we'll be successful in putting this down now, but we really need to be prepared for another cycle. And what we're doing, I believe, will prepare us well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr.